Okay, so today, the 7th of November, where's time going? It's just flying. We transition from the days of gorse into the days of heather. So I'm just going to bring up a PowerPoint presentation. Talk us through some of the heather lore. So heather, then, of course, it's a well-known heathland shrub. Only at the most it grows to about 2 foot high, and it's wild heathland all over the British Isles and the island of Ireland, and so on. Interestingly, with the Ogham Grove, it's equally positioned next to gorse. Now, this kind of pattern happened in the first ACMA, where you have the older tree and the willow tree side by side. And of all the 20 trees of the Ogham, only alder and willow favor the riverside. So they're the wetland trees. So we called it the water's edge. And this is a kind of similar thing, that out of the 20 trees of the Ogham, gorse and heather are not strictly speaking trees, of course. What they are between them is the wild heath. So going back to the kind of suggested story put forward by the fourth ACMA, which is pine, gorse, heather, aspen, and yew. So today, where gorse and heather meet is the actual midpoint between the autumn equinox and winter solstice. So that's technically speaking Samhain, summer's end. Sometimes it can be the 4th of November, 5th of November, 6th of November. It all depends on what the Gregorian calendar is doing. But it's always the midpoint of Scorpio. So that's a more precise way of just finding the middle space between autumn equinox and winter solstice. So anyway, the fourth ACMA then begins with the pine tree, which was the preparations for the wild hunt. And there's videos on that on the YouTube channel. And then after the preparations in the pine forests on the hilltops, the wild hunt begins on the wild heath, which is the gorse land. And we've just been through that for the last 18 days, and we've been racing through the gorse land to this midpoint. And then it's like the wild heath is going to change from gorse into heather. And it will continue that. So gorse and heather are that wild heath, that hunting land. But heather, its star law is different to gorse, of course. So gorse took us from Libra into Scorpio. Traditionally, Scorpio is the sign of death. And that's really important for the whole death and rebirth story of the fourth ACMA, and the idea of understanding psychopomp, divinities, guardian spirits that help people to the next world through the valley of the shadow of death and all of that. So gorse very much took us into the heart of the scorpionic wild heath. Now heather, still Scorpio, but it's not as spiky and vicious as gorse. It's a softer shrub, and it will take us out of Scorpio. It will take us out of Scorpio into Sagittarius. So the first 15 days, roughly, are Scorpio. And the very last day of Scorpio is the sting of the scorpion's tail that actually gives a death sting to Sagittarius. That's the star law story. We'll come to that. but what did I write down? So Scorpio is kind of like the deepest emotional waters and fears that we can have if we're plunging deep into shamanic journeys and so on, going into that deep, dark place of looking at all the skeletons in your closet or the emotional wounds that need healing. And that's kind of what the sun is doing through Scorpio. And then Heather is going to take us from that into the spiritual healing fires of Sagittarius. So Sagittarius, the centaur, is a wounded healer. It's wounded by the sting of the scorpion, but it's the great healer that teaches lots of solar gods how to be better than they are. They're like initiating them and healing them of their wounds and stuff. We'll come back to that. So here's an example of gorse and heather living side by side. So this is a perfect picture of what the Ogham Grove is doing. They are friends that share the heathland. And of all the trees in the Ogham, that's what they're singing about, this wild heath. Now, just to recap, I don't believe the Celts observed the zodiac signs, or at least the Iron Age Celts didn't, I don't think. But by the time you get to bardic traditions, poetic traditions of Ireland and Wales, you're well into the 11th and 12th centuries, and they fully understood the zodiac by that time. So when you say Celtic, you have to be clear, are you talking about the Iron Age Celts and the original Druids, or are you talking about the bardic mysteries and poetic mysteries, which are medieval? Not that it matters too much, and it doesn't matter if you think Samhain wouldn't be precisely the 15th degree of Scorpio. It's just simply a way of marking the midpoint between autumn equinox and winter solstice. That's just what it is. And so on the left here, you can see how gorse and heather hold that position of solar Samhain, which is today, which is now. So the corresponding secondary constellation for the days of heather is this constellation. Now, we know it today as Ophiuchus, or Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. It's a very large constellation of this figure holding a great big serpent, and there's different explanations for it in the same cultures, you know. So like in Greek culture, they have it as Apollo, the sun god, wrestling with the great big serpent from this famous temple called Oracle of Delphi. So before there was an Oracle of Delphi, there was this huge serpent that Apollo wrestled there. So to some stories it's that, but there's also Ophiuchus himself wrestling with the great big serpent, and also Asclepius, the great healer. And the healer is the important thing, I think, with all of this. Ophiuchus, or Asclepius, was such a brilliant healer that he could even bring, and this is really important for mystery traditions when we're looking for spiritual rebirth of the higher self after the mundane self, he was said to even be able to bring the dead back to life, you know, and that's loaded with mystery school things. And because he was so good at healing that he'd actually overcome death, the gods said, oh, we can't have this. Well, you know, that changes the status quo of things. So they took him and put him in the heavens. So that's one of the stories of the serpent bearer. The main thing, though, is this celestial healer. Now, it's hard to see, but on the far right-hand side, there's a big white globular area, and that's actually meant to be the scales of Libra. Actually says Libra inside it. And if you look at as we're looking at the picture, the right foot of Ophiuchus, he's standing on the scorpion. So you've got the scales of Libra, and then you've got the scorpion. And then on the left-hand corner, you can just about see the Sagittarius archer about to shoot his arrow. So you can see how Ophiuchus fills the gap between Scorpio and Sagittarius. And that's what Heather does. Heather goes from the 15th degree of Scorpio to the third degree of Sagittarius. So the star law of Heather, as well as being Samhain onwards, taking you from the deep dark waters of Scorpio into the healing fires of Sagittarius, is also this celestial healer that was so good at healing that they could bring the dead back to life. And Scorpio often represents death. So the constellation of Ophiuchus is actually standing on the scorpion. So that's a stance of overcoming the scorpion. You know, that's why he's got it crushed under his foot, and he's not suffering the poison from it or anything. So that's some of the star law. It possibly relates to the Canunus figure on the Gunderstruck cauldron, as we looked at in the previous video for Gorse. The great big serpent that Ophiuchus is holding, the head of it, the serpent's head, is held in one hand of Canunus, and he holds Corona Borealis, the torque, in the other hand. So whether it's Canunus on the Gunderstruck cauldron or this more classical zodiac figure of Ophiuchus, it's that moment in time. It's that Samhain wild hunt through the wild heath position of transitioning through Scorpio to Sagittarius. Before we get into the medicine of Heather, just wanted to make a note that in the Bryatheroan, which are the Irish word kennings, for Heather, it emphasizes the word which is U-R, which doesn't mean heather. It actually just means soil, earth, mud, soil. So the first kenning is in cold dwellings. That is, the floor of a very poor hovel is an earthen floor. It's a mud floor in cold dwellings. The second one is propagation of plants, which of course is a soil compost for making things grow. So it's kind of suggestive of seeds going into the ground for gestation as well, which is what this time of year holds. And then the third takes us back to kind of death things. Shroud of a lifeless one. So soil is scattered over a body that's been buried, of course, you know, shroud of a lifeless one. So that interesting. Although the Bryatheroan emphasized soil in 3 different ways, the Auraset Nemesis, which is the same book, you know, it's the Book of Ballymote, so it dates to 1390 AD. The Auraset Nemesis says Freyok, which is heather. I got to, this is my own unverified personal gnosis, but I got to looking at heather and thinking about heather and also the time of the year. And it coincided with knowledge that I only got this year about the hunter warriors of Ireland, the Fianna, and their culture hero, Finn McCool, are very much the kind of wild hunt of Ireland. And they were on the hilltop ridges, mountain ridges between tribal territories in the pine forests. So the ACMA begins with the pine tree, and that would be the wild hunters preparing to hunt in the pine forest. And the way it worked with the Fianna is they would live wild on the high ridges all year round, protecting the tribes of Ireland. But after the cold weather came, after Samhain, they would come down from the hilltops and they would winter in the village, in the tribe, you know, because it was so harsh and cold. So they would all get together for the winter months. And then after winter, I guess around Imbolc, they would return back to guarding the hilltops. And that's kind of fits in with what I've learnt to see heather as. And I gave it the name of domestic comforts. And it's for these reasons that it was used in so many ways. Thinking of being in cold dwellings and the cold earth and muddy floor, well, you're going into the cold months. You want to make life as comfortable as you can. So heather was used as a natural broom for sweeping floors and cleaning spaces. But then also it could be scattered around like straw. So it's almost a way of carpeting the floor from the cold, damp mud. You're making a kind of matted floor covering. It was also used for padding mattresses, you know, so you're making a kind of carpet with it, but you're also padding and firming up your bed with it. It also lends itself as kindling. So it literally was used for kindling the fire as well. So you've got comfortable floors, comfortable beds, perfect kindling for making a warm fire in the hearth. And then, as we were just talking about at the beginning, they also knew how to make a heather ale. So that's why I called it domestic comfort. And it fits in really nice with, you know, the wild hunt has happened. Now what is there to do? Well, there's the cold, stillness, death of the winter before the winter solstice. You just want to get indoors like the warriors coming down from the hillsides and get comfortable and get through the winter solstice and wait for spring to begin, sort of thing. So heather kind of has that. The gorse gives protection from the storm for lots of animals, and the heather too is a hiding place, a safety place, a comfort place for those wild creatures. So anyway, heather as a medicine is massive, quite befitting the constellation of Ophiuchus and Asclepius, the healers, you know. Quite unusually, not one part of the heather plant is toxic. Every bit of it is not toxic. You know, you could eat all of it if you wanted to. It's very woody and twiggy, but, you know, there's no toxicity with heather. Primarily for medicine, you dry the flowers, the leaves, and the tips, you know, because it's quite a woody thing, but all the softer bits you can take and dry. And the most easy way then of getting the medicine from it is as a tea. You know, of course, you could throw it into soup or whatever, but tea is the main way of using it. So here's a list of the things that it's been used to benefit. It helps infection in the urinary tract. It's anti-inflammatory. It helps break down kidney stones. It helps reduce an enlarged prostate, helps osteoarthritis. It heals wounds, either internal by drinking or external application. It helps with bladder ailments and rheumatic pains. It helps with diarrhea, stomach pains, and colic. It's mildly sedative, so it helps as a sleep aid, improving sleep. It's good for colds, coughs, and flus. It helps to reduce nervous tension and helps to fight depression, insomnia, and irritability. Topically, externally, it can be used for skincare as well. So, you know, an all-round powerhouse, really. As a herbal tea, you can buy it online easy enough. All the best comes from Scotland. In Scotland, there's even a company with this super duper massive pressing machine, and it gathers all the heather twigs together and compresses them really squashed together, making them as hard as a semi-precious stone. And that's how they use it. They actually then polish it, and you can actually buy jewelry which is actually compressed heather, and they stain it different colors. As a back flower remedy, Bach themselves say helps to develop empathy with other people. Another flower essence site I was looking at said it was useful for fighting feelings of loneliness. So again, it's that almost that kind of domestic comfort. There's something very healing about the color purple, of course. I think it was Bridget who mentioned last time that gorse is yellow and heather being purple. Their polarities, like red and green, are opposite, or blue and orange are opposite. So yellow and purple have a polarity magic with them. The only mushroom that I could find that pops up with heather, as it does in this photograph, is the Penny Bun mushroom, Boletus edulis. Wonderful, big, impressive mushroom. The heads do look like buns, bread buns. And if you see a lot of them in a basket, there's some great photos on, if you Google images, they do look like a basket of bread, penny bun. They're quite big. They can be like, I think the heads can be like 6 inches round, and they don't have gills. They're very spongy, so they're bread-like, and they're edible, of course, completely edible. They're also known as king bolet or porcini, and you can buy them online. And as you can see, they do live quite happily with lavender, so they're kind of a symbiont. So very, very high in protein, fiber, and iron, as well as selenium, manganese, and zinc, and also has a lot of complex B vitamins. So it's a superfood, the penny bun mushroom, which you can buy online dry. It's anti-inflammatory, it's high in antioxidants, and in recent years they made an extract out of the penny bun mushroom, and it succeeded in killing cancer cells of the colon, specifically the colon for some reason. But yeah, it's actually can kill colon cancer cells. Incredible. There's so much to learn and come out of the mushroom world. I feel like we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg with it. A plant for this time of year, you know, we're into November now. There's not a lot of wild flowers around. Most of them are fading off now, but there are some that are almost all year round, and wood sorrel is available still at this time of year. I must confess I've never eaten it. Now I've read about it, I would like to try it. It's meant to have a very lemony kind of flavour, a citrus lemon flavour, a bit tart, sharp, like maybe rhubarb is. But it's completely edible. Every part of the plant, even its roots, is edible. So you can throw it in soups or salads and so on. Again, it's an important medicine that's there for anybody. It's free foraging. It's antibacterial. It cleanses the liver and helps with digestive disorders. It's very high in vitamin A and vitamin C, so it's good for scurvy and wounds and swollen gums. It's often confused with clover because it has 3 leaves, and it often gets called shamrock, like clover is also called shamrock. But clover and wood sorrel are different plants, of course, but they're both 3-petaled or 3-leaved like this. There's over 500 different types of wood sorrel, but what we're talking about here is specifically the common wood sorrel. Yeah, so that's it for now. I'll shut this down and I'll keep recording, and we can talk about some of the observations of heather. Put your microphones back on.
Lots of information. You can freely buy heather tea in the UK.
I haven't actually looked for it, but you can buy it online, definitely. I haven't gone to a Whole Food shop specifically looking.
Because here in Belgium, it's very difficult to find that dried like that.
Well, there's
sell it.
Yeah, if you go on Amazon, you'll find a few in Scotland selling it. Do you have heather growing near you?
Yes, I have, but I don't know if here in the north, close to the border of the Netherlands, where I'm living, you have a big space with heather. But the problem here is in Belgium that you're not allowed to pick up plants like that, foraging or mushrooms or whatever. They are very strict with that.
You're not allowed?
No, like where I'm living, you cannot go to the forest and pick up mushrooms, for instance. If you go to the Ardennes, it's more easily. But here, where I'm living, the north of Antwerp, in the parks or whatever, you're not allowed to collect mushrooms, no, or other plants.
Couldn't you put a handful of heather in your pocket?
Yes, I could.
just
yes,
be a bit sneaky.
No, just of course. But I don't know. You have different kinds of heather too, and that I'm not very sure if they are all good. I have to inform myself about that.
So the common heather is actually called Calluna vulgaris. That just means common heather. And there isn't, so long as it's common heather, none of it is toxic, so it's perfectly safe.
I do have a story about heather. Heather possibly saved my life, literally. That sounds quite extreme, but when I first went to Iona in the mid-1990s, I went on a retreat, but I arrived a day early. And so there was no accommodation. And it was early in the year. And I walked down to the south of the island, which is quite wild, to Columbus Bay. And it was such a beautiful sunny day that I lingered. And it was too late for me to go back. It was across wild land. So I decided to sleep on the beach. And what I did, it was perishing cold, and I didn't have sleeping bag or any kit. And I got a bed of heather to insulate me from, the below. And it was my longest night ever. It was bitter cold. And I could have died actually from hypothermia. It was crazy. But the heather possibly made the difference, because it did insulate me from below. It was, and it was soft and comfy.
Yeah. Energetically, she was looking after you.
I think you're right. I didn't realize quite so much, but now I get it.
Yeah.
Little domestic comfort, hey?
Yes, a domestic comfort.
You split the word heather down as well. It's not just heather. If you look at it, it says heat, her, heat.
And
So
Heath.
I was reading, I think I forgot to mention it last time, but the word gorse comes from Anglo-Saxon gorst with a T on the end, and it just means wild heath. And so heather also just means heath. So gorse and heather both mean heath.
But I was fascinated by the Book of Ballymote has it as Freyoch. I
Yes.
think it's probably a stretch, but could Freya be in the mix there? I don't know.
Yeah, interesting.
And ask on the penny bun, you said all of that is edible, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the name of the heather ale, Freyoch.
Right.
Right.
Ah.
Yeah. I think it's Gaelic for heather. My dad's series of books, the book one, the main femme fatale female that the male character falls in love with is called Freyoch, which is heather. And she turns out that she's one aspect of a triple goddess, and they're all called Freyoch.
Yeah.
Triple heather goddess.
The other day, Linda got a book on healing plants.
Yes.
Picked it up because it had such lovely pictures. I thought I'd show you the heather.
Oh,
pic-
lovely.
Oh,
It hasn't got many of the ogham in it, only about half a dozen, but just beautiful pictures.
Jim, can you just confirm that the flowers, are they four petaled? Can you see?
No, I can see there. It looks, well, maybe they are. Maybe you've got four petals with four petals inside that are twisted.
Yeah.
If I perhaps put the flower close up.
oh, yes.
Because
With
they're
it-
so tiny in real life.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Oh,
so it's either two lots of four or it's eight petaled.
yes,
Yeah.
but that's the same thing with fives in roses.
Yeah.
It's fives inside fives, so I think that would count as four on that basis.
Four inside four.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If a rose is fives inside fives, then why should that be different?
Well, just like wood sorrel and clover being three-leafed, I don't know enough about it, but every tree in the ogham is going to have its numerical formula, and I think that's worth investigating. But I don't have that knowledge yet. But I kind of had it in my head. Heather was four petaled.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
Yeah, but a
You're
four
right.
inside a four.
Geometry with that, I think.
Yeah. So then, is there a kind of kindred connection between plants that are fives or threes or fours? That they're of the same frequency in some way. Kind of a music of creation, that kind of thing.
Very interesting.
It's like with
Yeah,
the
just-
rose family, if it's five petaled, it's usually edible, isn't it?
Interesting.
but-
Apples, fives.
Yeah. So, wondering how simplistic it would be, but like old hunter-gatherers, if they just saw something with 5 petals, they knew it was safe to eat. I don't know.
Mhm.
Poisonite, no oak. How many?
I've got. Oh, sorry.
Andrew?
Yes, got a bit of a far out connection here relating to a few things. So it's not that far out really, but we were just at a root chakra day with a teacher here in Wales, and she chooses this time of year to do the root chakra day and then goes through all the chakras throughout the year. So Scorpio being associated with the root chakra. Found it really interesting that the heather medicine had so many benefits for the sexual organs, the urinary tract,
Yeah.
the prostate.
Yeah.
Really resonates with the scorpionic energy.
Scorpio
And,
governs the genitals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that I thought that really resonated strongly. Another thing I wanted to ask about was the you know, that other sign, is it Oscapulus or the serpent holder? Yeah.
Asclepius.
Isn't that sign sometimes called the like a 13th sign?
Yeah,
of the
so
zodiac?
The 13, yeah.
there's a confusion there, is that throughout the year the sun travels along an imaginary orbit, which we call the ecliptic. And Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, is on the ecliptic. So some people say it's the 13th sign on the ecliptic. So that's quite true as far as astronomy goes. But with astrology, the ecliptic is divided into 12 equal divisions of 30 degrees to make a circle of 360 degrees. So there always was just 12 divisions of 30. But I think there's even 14 constellations that actually touch the ecliptic. The constellations on the ecliptic is different to the signs dividing the ecliptic into 12.
And is Chiron the wounded healer in that mix or not? I don't know, but it comes to mind. It's the wounded healer.
Yeah. The Sagittarius is often equated with Chiron, but there's also, in modern astrology, Chiron is an extra moon or planet in astrology. Asteroid, is it? Yeah.
Yes.
So there's 2 Chirons out there then. There's Sagittarius, the centaur, as a Chiron, and then there's his asteroid Chiron as well.
Okay.
But both of their law is that of the wounded healer. For certain. So yeah, just to recap, because Andrew mentioned the genitals, we went from thinking about internal alchemy now, you know, like the process of energy going down from the pineal gland or the upper cauldron down to the lower cauldron, which is what we're doing with this half of the year, is kind of like a descending of energy down to the lower cauldron. So from Leo, you're in the heart, and then Virgo, you're into the intestines and the digestion of all the granary of the great big cereal goddess, you know. And then Libra is the kidneys, and the kidneys are generating chi into your lower cauldron. And then from Libra being the kidneys, we're into Scorpio now, which is your genitals, and all of that root chakra power base, you know, all of that vitality in your lower cauldron, which is infinite. And when there's the uprising, it will shoot up the spinal cord, you know, from the lower cauldron. But then Heather is also going to carry on the zodiac journey. So Heather is Scorpio genitals, but it's also going to go into Sagittarius, which is your thighs. So Heather is going to take us from the deep emotional depths of the root chakra, but into the powerhouse of the thighs, which drives the internal fire or vitality, or that in the chi is developed by the thighs pumping and working the kidneys. So it's that kind of